Everyone has their own way of working when it comes to the creative process. And I want to share with you how I use keyboard shortcuts in Illustrator to speed up the vector building and make things a bit more efficient workflow wise. Now, I'm working on an iMac Retina running El Capitan, and I'll be using the latest version of Adobe Illustrator at this time, CC15. That said, keyboard shortcuts will work with this the same way if you're using, let's say, CS4. So if you don't have Creative Cloud, don't worry about it. You'll still be able to use the methods I'm going to show you. Now, regardless of how old your system is or what version of Illustrator you use, there is one thing you need to do. You need to go to your system prefs. Now, I'm not sure how this is pulled off on a PC. I'm sure you can do it, but I know on a Mac, you need to go to system prefs. You need to click on keyboard. And by default, this right here that says use all F1, F2, etc. keys as standard function keys, by default will not be checked. So you need to have that checked in order to do what I'm going to show you here. So with that checked, we can go ahead and close keyboard, and we're going to jump to Illustrator where I have a file already open. And before I demonstrate it's actually a total of 12 essential keyboard shortcuts I use every day, all day long. I wanted to explain how to record a keyboard or set a keyboard shortcut. It is not hard. It's really easy. You're just going to go up to Edit in the menu, and you're going to pull down to Keyboard Shortcuts, and it'll bring up the menu where you can make any change you want as it relates to a keyboard shortcut. So the selection tool is V. Now, I don't set any for my tools, but if you wanted to, you can. You can make it so you hit the F1 key and it would go to the selection tool. So however you want to set these up, it's based off of your preferences, what you want to do. So I don't use the tools. I focus on the menu commands because instead of having to go up and do 3 menu options to do one type of functionality of building, I can make it a one button push. And that's what I've done here. So I'll show you one of them I've set up. We'll go under Object, and this aligns with the menu at the top here. So we're going under all the menu items under Object at the top. We'll go ahead and scroll down, and we're going to go to, let's see, clipping mask, and we'll go ahead and open that. And you can see that there's make clipping mask, release clipping mask, and I've edited both to assign them to the F1 key for make and the F2 key for release. That's all you have to do. And to assign it, you just click, and then you just type whatever button you want it to be, whatever keyboard key you want it to be, and it'll assign it. In this case, I've assigned F1 to make and F2 to release. That's it. That's as complex as it gets to assign your own keyboard shortcuts. And if you ever want to go back, you can reset defaults. So you're not going to screw anything up here. But it's a great way to set up your own workflow, how you prefer to work, and over time speed up the whole build process. Now you can see I've saved my set as GS commands. And once you've made all these settings, you want to save it, because the next time you open up Illustrator, if you don't save it, they won't be there. They'll just disappear. So you'll want to, after you set everything up, go up here to the hard drive right next to this trash icon, click it, type in whatever name you want. Mine's called GS Commands, and click OK. But we have ours set up, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to kind of back out. And now I want to demonstrate how I use these keyboard shortcuts. So here's a design for an iPhone wallpaper, and I want to mask this artwork within this background shape. Now, I'm going to kind of give away another keyboard shortcut I use, which is the F3 key, which I'll go ahead and go in and select a shape such as this background here, and I hit F3, and what this does is it clones the shape and brings it forward. So if I drag this out of the way, you can see that that's all I've done there, is it's created a clone of that. Now I'll select this shape I've cloned, I'll select my artwork, and now I'm going to mask it by hitting F1. If I had to mask it without keyboard shortcuts, I'd go up to Object, pull down to Clipping Mask, and it just takes longer to do that. So I can just select both, hit F1, and it will mask it. So that's why I use a keyboard shortcut for this. If I turn on the next layer, you can see the next one I use is related to clipping mask, and it's to release them. It's to undo what I just did. And I can hit F2 to do that, and it removes it. If I change my mind, I can hit F1 again and put it back in place. So that's how I use F1 and F2 keyboard shortcuts. The next one is the one you've seen me previously use to clone the background shape that I masked into, but I also use it in other contexts such as building. Here's a brand character mascot I was working on, and I'm just going to demonstrate really simply how I use this in the process of building my artwork. So let's zoom in on this eye, and I select shapes and I use the clone F3. I hit it and it clones this shape. I have graphic styles set up so I can click on these outlines that I use all the time. I'll go ahead and F3 it again to make another clone of this shape. Then I'll slide it up, select both of these shapes, go to the Pathfinder and slice it out. I usually go over and get the eyedrop tool and then sample to get my shading. I'll select the inner part of this eye. I'll hit F3 again, and then I'll go like this to size it down, go up here, change the color to white, move it up here to make the highlight. I'll clone this shape, F3 again, size it down, move it down, and then use the eyedropper to fill it in. And so that's the methodology I use F3 to clone all the time. And it prevents, every time I use that, it prevents me from having to do 3 key menu options to pull that off. And instead of me copying and pasting, which is 2 commands, it's just a 1-button push. And because I've been using this so long, it's just really goes fast and works well. So that's how I use the F3. The next one is the F4, and F4 is send to back. It's to take any element. So let's say we're working on this design, and I've created these rings. I want them to be behind the skull. Well, I could set up layers and move it to a new layer so it pushes it behind the skull. I could go up to Object and Arrange, and I could go Send to Back and do it this way. But once again, that takes more time. But in this case, I have just F4 set up so I can select the shape, hit F4, and it pushes everything to the back the way I want it. Now, so I use that all the time in the process of building. Now the next one is associated with this. It's bring to front. So in the same way, in the same design actually, I could select the skull and I go, I actually want this above this kind of branded mark here. So I'm going to use F5 to bring to front, and it's going to bring it forward. Once again, it avoids having to go up here to arrange and then select that option in the menu. So it just speeds up the process. So that's how I use F4 and F5. Now with F6, ungroup. Group is the same way in almost every application. In this case, I have this design with all these pieces that make up this segmented illustration of a guy enjoying his digital music. And if I select all the elements, I can group it by just going Command G. So now it's grouped. Well, to ungroup it, if I go up to Object, you can see that I have F6 applied. But in actuality, the default command is like a 3-button push, and it's almost like trying to do, I don't know, weird gymnastics with your hands to pull off some of these keyboard menu commands. So I never bothered to memorize it. I just figured, heck, I'll just make it a 1-button push, and I've never looked back. And so to ungroup stuff, I can just hit F6, and now this is ungrouped now. So that's how I use F6. Not complicated, but it's something I use all the time. Here's another one. This is create compound path. Now, a lot of people don't understand what compound paths are in Photoshop, or in Illustrator, that is. If you select a shape, you can tell if it's compound by going to the appearance panel, and it will tell you. If it's not, it'll just be a path. If it's like just, let's say, just this one little leaf here, or if it's a grouped item, this could be a grouped element, but in this case, it's compound, meaning it's acting as Illustrator looks at it as one solitary unit. Now, when I build vector art like this, there's times where I want to make edits to it. So in this case, I'll grab my shape tool and let's just do this, go like this. And I'm going to just lop off the top of this element here. So we'll do that by remove from shape. And you can see as soon as I did this, if we look at the appearance panel, it will turn it into a group element. And you might be thinking, well, what's wrong with that? Well, here's the problem you can run into when you're building like this. Let's say I decided that I didn't get that lop off enough, so I go back and I want to lop off a little more. When you do that and I cut that off, you could have this happen where you'll lose pieces of your art. Now that one you would notice if that happened, but there's times where you won't notice. It'll like maybe drop off one of these leaves. Now as you build, you can hold Option down and click a Pathfinder option and it will automatically retain the compound nature, but once again, it requires another button push, and I don't like doing that. So anytime I make an edit like this, I have F7 set up that I can just hit, and it makes the compound, it returns it to a compound nature. So if I look at the appearance panel, it says group, and if I hit F7, it's now a compound path again. And that's good because I want to make edits to my artwork and not worry about if I'm going to screw up my artwork. So once again, if I unite this using the Pathfinder to make a new piece of art, even when I'm adding art, it removes the compound nature again. And so in this case, I would just hit F7 again to return to a compound nature. So I always work with compound paths, not groups. It just makes the process easier. And if you get in the habit of using this, and this is more of a production thing. I never ran into this problem with Freehand. Freehand was a smart enough app to know that compound paths are what you should be using, and you shouldn't really be using groups to build certain type of artwork. But for whatever reason, the engineers at Adobe have made it a little more complicated. So that's how I get around that. The next one is the F8 key. Now this is one, once again, it's in the heat of creating that I use this, and I don't use it all the time, but I have need for it enough that I made it a keyboard shortcut. So I'll be working on art like this, but most of the time when I work on my art, I'm zoomed in really close like this. And in this case, let's go over here and we'll go to the blob brush. Let's see how big this is. I don't want it too big, so we'll go 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build my shading for this, and it'll be using this color here. So let's go ahead and switch to that color. And then I'm just going to be building like my shading, let's say like this. Get rid of the inner part of that. And when I'm in something like this and I'm building, there's times where, in this case, I'm just once again creating the shading here. Because I'm zoomed in, I don't have any available desktop that I can just simply go over and click to deselect anything. And I don't want to just go in and like, well, I'll select this, so I'll deselect the shape that I have now. Right now I have this shape selected, but if I try to deselect it by selecting another shape, I still have something selected. So when I'm zoomed in like this, I just hit the F8 key and it deselects all. So that's all that is. It's not that complicated, and it's not something I use all the time. It's just in the heart of building where I can't really just click the background to deselect everything. So that's how I use that. The next one is the same function that you'll find here in the Pathfinder, which is remove from shape, but or subtract, but I've made it a keyboard command keyboard shortcut, that is, just to make the process go faster, because sometimes I'm too lazy to move over and grab my Pathfinder and to use that. So in this case, I'll select a shape like this, select this black, and I'll go ahead and actually, I want to have both these selected, and then I'm going to hit the F9 key, and it's just going to punch it through. And you can see, once again, if I go to appearance, it's retained the compound nature. Now, the reason why is this is where actions are going to come in. So I'm going to drag this out here. And when you go to actions, you can see I have actions set up. I have converting CC to CS5. I have my clone command you saw earlier, which is actually a recorded action of me going copy, paste in front, paste or bring to front, and then I assign the F3 key to clone. So it's actually an action assigned to the F3 key. And the same thing with punch. I'm just assigning the F9 key with the subtract feature in the Pathfinder, and then I run a make compound path command on it as well. So it does two commands with a one button push that I'm calling punch. And we'll go ahead and drag this back over here. And so because of that, I can keep subtracting stuff using F9 like this. I'll hit F9 with these two shapes subtracted, and you see it retains the compound nature because I have that built into my actions. Whenever you're using features like this, you have to make sure that your elements are in front. So we'll use the F5 key that brings things to front. That, once again, they all work together. I'll select this shape, and then I'll hit F9. And I'll punch that out. I'll select this bottom shape here, F5 to bring to front, and F9 to punch out. So that's how I use them together to create my designs and motifs, whether it's a logo, whether it's a graphic like this, it doesn't matter. Here's another one I use all the time. This is F10. This is to place things into Illustrator. Before you weren't able to script the place command. They've changed that. Now you can, and I have it assigned to the F10 key, so I can be on be in whatever project I want. Hit F10, and it's going to bring up a menu. And in this case, we want to go to the desktop. I want to select a texture, and we're going to go ahead and place this texture. So I'll do that here. And in this case, I want this to be a little smaller. And we're going to colorize this white. And let's see, I want it fainter than this, so we'll go 30. So that's how I use it. I just use it simply to place elements from my desktop into my file that I'm working on, whatever that may be. And then the next two, the last two I want to go over, are actually options of my original. So I use Option key held down plus F1, and this allows me to select the same fill color. So when I'm working on a design like this, I might decide, you know what, I'm not really too thrilled with, this color here. I think it might look better if I utilize a different color here. So I can select a shape and go Option F1, and it will select all the same shapes with the same color, and then I can tell it to be a new color. In this case, we'll change it to this. Or I'll select this darker kind of reddish color, and then I'll go Option F1. It'll select all the shapes that are that same color, and then I decide I want to change it to more of a dark brown. So that's how I'll use that key command. It just makes the process easier. If I didn't have this, I'd have to select one, then I go up to select, pull down to same, go over to fill color, and then let go, and then it would do the same. And that just takes longer. So it just simplifies the process. That's what keyboard shortcuts does. The next one is Option F2, and this is similar to the other one. It's a selection command, but in this case, it selects the same stroke color. So Once again, I don't use these all the time. It just depends on the specific project I'm working on. In this case, I might select an element like this, and I'll hold Option, I'll go F2, and it'll select all the same strokes with the same color, so that I can either, maybe I go to the strokes palette and I increase the size of the stroke, or I go to the stroke color and I change the color of the stroke, so on and so forth, or I apply a brush to it. It depends on what you're doing, but it allows you to select things without having to go in and pick and choose and try to find every iteration of it in a design. You can let your application figure that out and just make the whole process faster. So all of the methods I've showcased work well for me, and since I've been using them for years now, they're all muscle memory now, and that is what you want. You want to make the process seamless and streamlined and easier. So take some time and figure out what routine methods or functions you can simplify into one button pushes and customize your own workflow using keyboard shortcuts in Illustrator.